Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck, and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks, and this week, from Outcast to Offset, Fender's Unlikely Heroes. So a few days ago, I was reading an old issue of Guitarist magazine and stumbled across a brilliant article on Fender's offset models, written by a good mate of mine actually, Mr. Hugh Price, a name you'll probably recognise from any of the previous episodes of Friday Fretworks that have involved maintenance or repair or restoration to any degree on any of my guitars. Now, aside from being a superb luthier, Hugh was also a brilliant writer, so it wasn't wholly unsurprising to come across a quote which made me think and made me laugh in equal measure. Like so many of Leo Fender's products, Fender's offsets ended up being wildly successful at producing sounds that ran contrary to his intentions and that would not have met his approval. Now, I've done episodes on individual Fender offset models in the past, but looking at their history as a whole really was intriguing and shone a light on the fact that despite their undoubted cemented status in this day and age as Fender's alternative model of choice, this hasn't always been the case. And at the time of release, especially relative to the runaway success of the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, they were a bit of an abject failure. So what happened? What went wrong? And more importantly, how did they so spectacularly turn their fortunes around? Now, to say that the 1950s was Fender's decade would be something of an understatement. After its official formation as a company in 1946, Fender experienced a succession of monumental successes with the release of the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, respectively. Two guitars that some 70 years on are as ubiquitous as ever. But Leo Fender clearly never wanted to sit still and set his eyes on another prize, namely jazz guitar players. Now, somewhat ironically, while Gibson were trying to chase down Fender's solid body success with the release of the Les Paul in 1952, Fender were chasing after a market that more traditionally was Gibson's domain with their hollow body arch tops. And thus, in 1958, Fender unveiled a guitar to the world that they dubbed America's finest electric guitar, the Jazzmaster. After the success of the Stratocaster and its groundbreaking array of tonal variety, it's a very little surprise that the Jazzmaster went one step further and was undoubtedly Fender's most innovative model to date. The two purpose-designed pickups, an entirely newly designed tremolo system that ironically was actually scheduled for the Stratocaster before hasty redesign after some earlier issues, and a complex electronic configuration that some 66 years on is still not exactly universally understood. The principal idea, not wholly dissimilar actually from the Esquire's dead tone position, meant to emulate the sound of a bass guitar, the Jazzmaster's rhythm circuit was precisely that, a preset rhythm and lead sound. When the switch is down, in its lead position, the guitar is controlled solely by the usual master volume and tone controls, as well as of course the three-way selector. But when the switch is up, in the rhythm position, it's routed through the neck pickup only and through lower value potentiometers, specifically 50k, as opposed to the 1 meg or 1000k pots when you're in the lead circuit. However, undoubtedly the Jazzmaster's most distinctive feature, at least aesthetically, would be its offset waist, which in turn would give rise to the moniker offset, these days used in reference to pretty much any guitar that is asymmetrical. The idea being that it would make the guitar more comfortable to play while sat down, of course something particularly common in jazz. It was also Fender's first guitar to feature a rosewood slab fingerboard, again a nod at its intended audience, but as much as Fender clearly bent over backwards to try to accommodate the jazz world, to quote Keith Williams from 5 Watt World, it seemed to be an answer to a question that the jazz world simply hadn't asked, and the Jazzmaster was undoubtedly the fledgling company's first real misstep. Fast forward to 1962 and the introduction of the Fender Jaguar. For my American friends, the Jaguar, or the Jaguar. Now, as much as the Jazzmaster may not have actually turned out to be a master of jazz, it had found somewhat unlikely favour with the burgeoning surf guitar scene, which had swelled up in the late 50s and was breaking across America. By the early 1960s. It snapped a smooth preset, finding particular favour with the Ventures guitar player Bob Bogle on their Jazzmaster-laden hit, Walk Don't Run, which climbed to number 2 in the summer of 1960. And thus, in response to this surf guitar explosion, the Jaguar was born. Reportedly the last Fender guitar that Leo Fender himself would play a role in designing. Before the company sailed to CBS in 1965, the Jaguar was introduced as Fender's new top-of-the-line guitar, retailing at a somewhat staggering $379.50, just above the average American monthly income, and in today's money, about $3,900. But as much as the Jazzmaster hadn't been the runaway success that they'd envisioned, Fender were clearly committed to the innovations that it had introduced. Most obviously, the Jaguar came with a virtually identical body shape to that of the Jazzmaster, although, worth pointing out for the pedants, not literally identical. The Jaguar's horn is slightly sharper than that of a Jazzmaster, but of course it came with the same vibrato system, the same somewhat baffling array of electronic components and controls, but crucially, the Jaguar came with 2 Strat-like single coil pickups, complete with a chrome cradle designed to reduce electronic interference and hum, and produced a more focused, clear sound. The Jaguar was also Fender's first guitar to feature a 22nd fret, some 24 years actually before that would come on a Stratocaster. Clearly a nod or acknowledgement of what Gibson were doing, not only with the Les Paul, but with the newly released SG Les Paul. Another noticeable difference from the Jazzmaster was the Jaguar's scale length. While the Jazzmaster had a very Fender typical scale length of 25.5 inches, much like the Telecaster and the Stratocaster, the Jaguar had a scale length of 24 inches. Fender billed the guitar as faster and easier to play, and alongside the Jazzmaster, it is easy to see why. With the bridge mounted pretty centrally on a Jazzmaster, it can make the guitar feel somewhat like a Gibson SG, where the neck seems to go on forever, but comparatively, the Jaguar undoubtedly feels a lot more compact. Perhaps the most notable addition to the Jaguar, however, were the 3 slider switches in place of the more traditional 3-way selector switch. The controls on the upper bout act in much the same way as a Jazzmaster, while the additional 3 sliders turn on each pickup manually, as well as activate what would be known as the strangle switch, which is essentially a high-pass filter, meaning that it only allows the high frequency through, while simultaneously attenuating the low end. So how was the Jaguar received? Now, after the Jazzmaster found unlikely favour with the surf guitar scene, it's very easy to see why Fender zeroed in on pushing the Jaguar as the surf guitar of choice with their You Won't Part With Yours Either campaign, touting the Jaguar as the guitar for all weathers or pretty much any adrenaline-inducing activity. But ultimately, the Jaguar was to prove to be Fender's second successive flop. And by the time the British invaded in 1964, surf music was all but dead in the water. Sorry, with Jazzmasters and Jaguars being relegated very much to secondary status. The Jaguar being discontinued in 1975 and the Jazzmaster following suit in 1980, just as punk hit big in New York and London. Shunning the mainstream, or perhaps maybe just unable to afford a more expensive Telecaster or Stratocaster, punks gravitated towards those bargain basement offsets. And while punk may have only burned bright for a very short period, its innumerable post-punk mutations saw a vibrant resurrection of not only the Jazzmaster, but the Jaguar and the Mustang, Fender's later offset, which had been introduced in 1964, as they found their way into the hands of anyone from television's Tom Verlaine, to Sonic Youth's Thurston Moore and Lee Ronaldo, Dinosaur Jr.'s Jay Mascis, My Bloody Valentine's Kevin Shields and Belinda Butcher, the Talking Heads' David Byrne, the Smiths' Johnny Marr, Wilco's Nels Cline and Jeff Tweedy, and undoubtedly most prominently, Nirvana's Kurt Cobain, who, armed with his heavily modified 1965 Jaguar, near enough single-handedly transformed alternative and grunge music into a worldwide phenomenon, all of which helps cement the offset's place not only in Fender's lineup, but as the alternative guitar of choice, a reputation that it still enjoys to this day. Looking back with 60-year hindsight, the Jaguar took a very similar trajectory to that of the Jazzmaster, surviving adversity and public indifference, only to emerge stronger and more popular than ever, albeit far from its intended audience, which, as Hugh pointed out, probably wouldn't have been much to Leo's pleasure. As ever, I'm Chris Buck, this is Friday Fretworks. Please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and let's just see you next week for another episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.